The person who's speaking now is Bhavani Rao, and she's the director of AMMACHI Labs and the Center for Women Empowerment and Gender Equality.
Okay.
I'm going to quickly turn on my video just to say hi, and just a quick welcome. I don't know if you can see me, but me and Sophia are here. Hi.
Hi.
Hello.
And Sophia is not Indian. So this is two of us from
Only
here
pretending Indian sometimes.
and we're so excited about your talk, and we're so grateful to sit for here. And I think over the next hour and a half, I think.
Bhavani, whatever you're doing, it's interfering.
Bhavani, there's a lot of ambient sound.
Okay.
It was hard to hear. But we heard that you're very excited. So it's
I am. Both of us are. I think we all are.
Excellent.
Thank you so much for taking the time. I know that Sid is going to do the formal introductions and the formal welcomes, but that's just me saying hi.
Okay, thank you. Sure.
Okay, so friends, why don't we begin? I'll say a few words of introduction, and excuse me once again for my hiccups. So in the middle, you'll hear me stopping. It's also out of excitement that Goren Gordon will be speaking, but it's also my hiccups. So, as all of you probably know, there are scientists and academics who work in established fields, and they add what they add, and sometimes the additions can be very creative within the discussion that's taking place at the time. And there are some people who chart a new course, who ask sometimes similar questions about new content. Goren is of the second type. He puts together a diverse a number of domains to try to understand what is not usually talked about in terms of AI and neurobiology, etc. The issue of curiosity. Curiosity, my guess is you speak to most people and they just see it as within the domain of human cognition. There's a way of expanding it. And Goren, as he likes to do, has expanded that immensely. A lot of what he'll have to say depends on how the concept of curiosity is defined, of course, and we'll hear that along the way. At a personal level, his wife, who at the time I'm pretty sure was not his wife, was the lab assistant in my lab at Tel-Aviv University. Michal, she was wonderful. She was a student of mine in the psychology department. And one of the reasons that she was working in my lab was that she stuck out among really talented young people as unusual. And I also had the pleasure of meeting with Goren several times at his lab, the Curiosity Lab at Tel-Aviv University. And my apologies, Goren, for kind of talking behind your back. The meetings we had were always engaging, playful, interesting, and very on task. And last, he had a resurrection. I told students of mine many times that that dying and getting a PhD have something in common. You only do it once in life. But here we have Goren, who died twice and is here to tell it. So I got a PhD in quantum physics and a PhD in neurobiology. So Goren, thank you so much for coming, really taking time out to be with us. And I know that we're all very much looking forward with curiosity to hear about what your latest thinking is. So thank you again.
Thank you, Sid, for this introduction and for inviting me to come here. Wow, I'm really excited. I actually, because I'm talking about curiosity, I love questions during my talk. So I don't know how to do it now in Zoom, because maybe raise your hand or write something in the chat if I can somehow see it. And I'll share my screen. Hopefully you can see it now.
Yes, sir.
Excellent, thank you. So first a little bit about me, and then I'll talk about my research, my prior research, and then my more recent things. So a little bit about me. So I've been 20 years a student in the university, like half of my life. I have 6 degrees, so triple double. I have 2 undergrads, 2 graduates, and 2 PhDs, as he said. So I have an undergraduate, a graduate, and a PhD in quantum physics. Actually, my book, The Quantum Matrix, just came out, where we actually invented the new quantum superhero, and we explain lots of things about quantum mechanics using this comic book and also philosophy and stuff like that. So if you actually want to hear about quantum physics, then maybe at the end of the talk, that's an option. I'll have to talk about it. I also have a bachelor in medical science and a master in business administration. Opened some startups. You know, I'm in Israel. We have to open a startup, otherwise you get deported. So I've opened some startups. And then I did my second PhD in neurobiology about curiosity. I'm going to talk a little bit about the research I did there. After finishing my second PhD, I went to MIT, the Media Lab, to do my postdoc. And obviously with my wife, who also has a PhD in computer science. As Sid said, she's very talented. And we actually did, both of us, a postdoc at the same lab. It was somewhat crazy because we had our 3rd child there. So we had our Gordon office there, where me, my wife, baby in the crib, spent there a year. And after finishing the postdoc, I went back to Tel Aviv and opened the Curiosity Lab. And now I'm starting my 6th year here. And I'm going to talk a little bit about my work here. Other important things, I have a teaching certificate from MIT. I have 4 children. You'll see most of them during my talk. Here's one of them. And I teach at my children's school for like an hour a week for the last 3 years. That's it for now. Again, if you have any questions, I don't know how I'm going to see if you have questions. You know what? Let's try if someone has a question, that's just unmute, say, Goren, I have a question, and I'll hear you because I don't see any other option now. So I'll start my talk. So I'm studying curiosity. This is another one of my children. And you know, yeah, and you know, when as a parent you see one of your children standing up for the first time, you're so proud. You say, "Oh my God, she's genius! She stood up so early." But as a scientist, you need to ask why. She has no reason to stand up, because we'll still give her food and love even if she crawls until the age of 20. We'll obviously be worried, but she'll still get all the things she needs. So why is she standing up? And then as a scientist, I started to think about maybe because she stood up, she suddenly discovered a whole new world. She got tired of seeing shoes and legs, and suddenly she stood up and saw a whole new world. And she was very excited about it. So she stood up, she discovered something new and was very happy about it, and then said, okay, standing up is really cool. Let's do that more. So here's another one of my children, my eldest, and I love this movie, not because she's my child, not only because she's my child, because you can actually see she's happy. So she's exploring this toy, and you see she's extremely happy about it. So again, she's exploring the environment, learning new things, and she's happy about it. And then she's doing it more. And in my group, in my lab, what we're trying to do is to understand this, formalize it in a mathematical way, and then do this. So this is George, in attribution to Curious George. And we want the robot to explore its environment and be extremely happy about it. So this is what we're doing in the lab. We're trying to understand children and then formalize what's happening on in their brain in mathematical equations, and then putting into robots and trying to understand, trying to recreate it. And now the point here is that you're going to see lots of robots with various forms and a lot of algorithms inside them. But it's weird, but I'm actually not interested in robots. I'm actually interested in people. And I'm using the robots to actually test my computational models on how children behave. So you're going to see a lot of robots behaving in very cool ways, but I'm actually interested in comparing those behaviors to what children do, to better understand children. Again, I also had a PhD in neuroscience, so I know the brain is a very complex thing, but we actually know a lot about the brain. You probably all know what an fMRI machine is. It's a very cold and noisy machine. You put the people inside, and then you ask them to do stuff, and then you see which areas of the brain work more when they do stuff. And this is a very cool experiment. They put people in fMRI, not mine. They put people in fMRI, and they showed them questions and asked them to rate which questions are you interested in, which questions are you curious about, and then gave them the answers. And what you see here are the brain areas that lit up for the questions that you got answers to that you were curious about, as opposed to not curious about. So these are the area of the brains that light up when your curiosity is fulfilled. So there's a lot of three-letter acronyms, but actually all of them are part of what is called the reward network. And the reward network is what is actually activated when you eat chocolate and when you're happy about things and you get rewards from external sources. And what this experiment actually showed is that the reward system, usually associated with the dopamine, is actually also activated when you learn things you're interested about. Not when you learn things you're interested about. And that actually connects to psychology, where that states that curiosity is actually a primary drive, like food, like hunger. And when you're curious and like you're hungry and suddenly you get food or you get information, you actually get rewards. But it's more than that, because the reward system also changes your behavior. So if you get reward, the behavior that got you that reward actually gets strengthened. And again, this is true for information. So when you learn something new, the actions that you did in order to learn that are actually get strengthened, which is very cool. But it's actually more than that. A relatively new study by Gruber actually showed something very cool. When you gave a question, again, like a trivia question, what was the hit song of the Beatles in 1971? I don't know, something like that. And you're interested about it, then your brain goes to a curious state. Like specific areas in the brain light up when the question is presented, not when the answer. So you're in a curious state, and one of the areas that are lighted are actually the hippocampus, which relates to memory. And what they showed is that actually you remember better when you're in that curious state. So but what they showed is even more than that. It's not that you remember better the answer to the question that you wanted, but also to random things that you were shown after that. So for example, if you were asked about the Beatles and then you showed random faces, you remember more faces when you're asked the question that you're curious about. So it means that you're in a heightened curious state and your brain is susceptible to information and you remember it more, which is very, very cool and very important for education. Yes, a question. I heard maybe a question.
Hey, Goren.
Yes.
Hi, this is Tzul from Tel Aviv. How are you?
Yes.
This is really, really similar to what Professor Yadin Dudai did with memory. So you just call that period of time that we're receptacle to memorizing, you call that curiosity time, or?
No. There are a lot of actually that's not my area of expertise, but there may be a lot of different conditions or context where your brain is susceptible to more information and you are more likely to remember. What they showed here is just priming your curiosity by asking you a question that you're interested in takes you to that state. So probably there are other things that can initiate those memory enhanced states, but what they showed is curiosity is one of them. Okay.
Right.
Excellent. Thank you. Good. I love questions. You know what? I will sometime stop for anecdotes. So I teach at my children's school, and I challenge one of my colleagues, Susan Engel, who wrote a book about curiosity. And I told them, look, I don't want them to learn anything, but I want to promote their curiosity. So what can I do? You have 45 minutes once a week. How can I promote curiosity? One of the things I'm using in my classes is the 15 minutes of the first 15 minutes of the class. I ask them to ask questions about whatever they want, and I give them points. So it's 1 point for a good question. A good question is a question not about God. For some reason, they asked me only about God, and I said I have no PhD in God. I don't know anything. So it's a question about science. So a good question, a question about science, and it's a well-formulated question. And I give them 2 points if I don't know the answer, and 3 points if Google doesn't know the answer. So suddenly they started thinking about really, really cool questions. I'll give you two examples. One of them is, how high can a bird fly? When you ask Google this question, what you get is how high was discovered flying, but that's not the question. How can a bird fly is actually an engineering question, engineering and biology question. And the second question was very cool. When were the eyeglasses invented? And again, when you ask Google, they don't know when it was invented, but they know when it was first referenced. So I challenge you to ask me really cool questions that I don't know their answer during the talk. And again, the more complex and the more difficult questions, the better. I'll continue. So again, we have this connection between curiosity and the reward system and memory and learning. So first I need to have the definition. There are around 100 definitions of curiosity. This is one of them, and this is mine, and I like it because it's mine. So it's in the intrinsic drive to learn as much as possible and the accompanying behavior. So let's decompose it. It's an intrinsic drive. Curiosity comes from within. You can't give a curiosity pill. You obviously can crush it. That's called the educational system. But it's an intrinsic drive. Everybody's born curious. You can see it in every baby. We are all born curious, an intrinsic drive. It comes from within. Learn as much as possible means that for a curious person, for every answer, there's a new question. You don't just ask a question, give an answer and say, okay, I got the question. No, you always want to learn more. And the accompanying behavior means that you can't be passively curious. Curiosity is a behavior. It means that you ask a question, you explore, you tinker, you explore your environment to learn as much as possible, and it comes from within. It comes in for intrinsic drive. So once we have this verbal definition, you can build a model. A model is words in boxes. That was a joke for engineers. And my model is called the curiosity loop. And as you can see, it's the two main components. One is the learning, and the other one is behavior. And that's something very important about curiosity. It's obviously about learning. You want to learn, right? But it's more about the behavior. And it's important to dissociate, especially with psychology and education, because you can have a very smart person that is not curious, which means everything you will teach it, it will learn, but it just doesn't want to learn anything. And vice versa, you can have a very non-smart person who is very curious. It wants to learn, but it just doesn't understand anything. So you must dissociate between learning and curiosity. There is a correlation between intelligence and curiosity, but they're not the same thing. And that's very important to think about. And in my model, this is a computational model. And for the learner, you can put whatever machine learning model you want. I'm using neural networks this time, and information theory-based learning and Bayesian inference. The important thing is that once you learn something, you need to have a quantitative measure of what you learned. So for example, in supervised learning with neural networks, it's called the prediction error. In Bayesian inference, it's called the KL divergence or information gain. You have a quantity of how much you improved given the new information you got, okay? And why is it important? Because of the behavior. For the behavior, I'm using what's called reinforcement learning algorithms. Again, hopefully most of you know what it is, but if you don't, then I'll 60 seconds about reinforcement learning. Reinforcement learning, everyone with a dog knows what it is. If you want to teach your dog to bring your newspaper, then the dog does a lot of things. When it brings the newspaper, you give it reward, you reinforce that behavior, and that reward strengthens that behavior that got the reward. How you do it with a robot or with a computational model. So the reward is just a high number, and you change the probabilities of the behaviors that you're going to select. So let's say you have a robot that can go forward, backward, left, or right. You want it to go forward. So initially it has 25% of going forward, backward, left, or right. If it accidentally goes forward, you give it a reward. It's a big number. It's a large positive number that increases the probability of the last action it took. One second, I hear there's a question. Let me finish this, and then I'll get you time. So it reinforces the behavior or the last action. So the probability of going forward increases and all the other ones decreases. And if it goes backward, you give it a small reward or a punishment, and it decreases that behavior. And then after a lot of exploration, you actually get a robot that goes forward because that's the main thing. Even though you didn't tell it to go forward, you just give it reward. Yes, there's a question. Question?
Yes, this is Sophia. Hello, Gordon.
Yes. Hello.
Hello. Why is a high number a reward for a robot? I mean,
So,
for a dog, it's obvious. If you say good dog, or if you give it some food, it will be a reward. But why is a high number a reward for a robot?
Okay, so excellent question. We're just trying to map how the brain works. So the brain, when you get a reward, gets dopamine, and dopamine strengthens the last things that you did. And we're just transforming this to a computational model, to an algorithm. So the transformation for the algorithms means that when you got reward, like high dopamine, then that is transformed to a high number. In the algorithm, the reward, this number influences the change of actions, the change of action selection. So you change the probability of selecting actions. So that's the definition of the reinforcement learning algorithm. And it's based on how the brain works. So it's just the algorithm. This is the definition of the reinforcement learning algorithm. The reward is a scalar value. The higher it is, the more you'll do the last action again. And if it's small, then the probability of doing the last action is decreased. So that's just the definition of the algorithm. Hopefully I answered your question. And now to come back to curiosity. So we have on the one hand, you're learning about your environment. You're learning to dissociate, to classify dogs and cats, and you learn how to control your body. You learn a lot of things in the world. And on the other hand, you have like this mechanism of how to learn how to behave, how you change the behavior if you get reward. And the curiosity is just linking the two, where the amount of things you learned is equal to the reward. So I'll give you like two examples. One very simple. If you ask a question, that's your behavior. If you get an answer, you learn something new. So you learn something. And that means if you learn something, you'll be rewarded. That means that your question asking behavior will be strengthened. That means you'll ask more questions because you learn that asking questions gives you information about the environment. But if you ask questions and the teacher tells you, shut up, you're disturbing the class, you didn't learn anything new, and you saw that behavior did not give you any information, it actually gave you punishment, so you'll stop asking questions. So if you do a behavior asking you exploring, and suddenly you're discovering something new, then that's something you can, it's strengthened. I'll give another example for toddlers or babies. You know, when you give a remote control with buttons to a baby, the first thing it does, it puts it in its mouth. But it doesn't get any reward because it has no taste. But suddenly it presses the red button, and suddenly something turns on, the TV, the radio, something turns on, and suddenly it discovered something new. It learned something about the environment, a lot of new information. And now so it learned something new and it gets rewarded. What was get rewarded? The press a button behavior gets rewarded. And suddenly they learn, whenever I press a button, something happens. So let's press all the buttons I can find. So this is the curiosity loop. And once you can actually, once you have this model, you can formalize it in a mathematical model, and I call it the curiosity equation, which means information equal reward. The more you learn, the more reward you get, and the more you change your behavior. And if you have this equation, you can actually code it, preferably in Python, and you code things in Python, and then you move to the cool stuff. So this is a robot. hopefully everybody recognizes this robot. Can someone tell me what robot this is? Open your mic, unmute, and tell me which robot it is. Everybody should recognize this robot. Anyone?
Looks like a Lego EV3 kit.
Yeah, exactly. It's a Lego robot. Excellent. So I convinced my PhD supervisor to buy me Lego for research. And I played with Legos for like my entire PhD. So this is a very simple robot. It has 2 degrees of freedom, 1 motor for the hand, 1 motor for the camera, and the brain. The brain doesn't come with the kit. It just slides around in my lab. So I put it there. And my question was this. It's a very, very simple and naive question. What can a robot learn by itself? When I say by itself, it's without external supervision. I'm not giving it external information. I mean, it just behaves and gets and learn by itself. And again, I'm using a robot, but what I'm actually interested in is about babies. So the question is, what can it learn? So the only thing it can learn are correlations between its motor system and the sensors, right? It moves, it has 2 motors, it gets sensors from the motors and also from the camera. So the only thing it can learn are correlations between sensors and motors. And what I did is, because it's such a simple robot, I actually tried to learn all the correlations, all the 2-to-1 correlations from all the sensors and all the motors. So for example, if I move my hand, what do I see? If I move my 1 motor, what does the other motor feel? All the 2-to-1 correlations, there are like 100 and something correlations, and I used neural networks with something very cool, something called pruning. Pruning means that if a network doesn't learn, so if you give it white noise, then it suddenly all the neurons are disappearing and the network disappears. So the robot tried to learn everything, and I used this pruning. So the only networks that survive are networks with information in them. And the information that it actually learned are something very simple. It's called the internal models of the internal models. For example, if I move my hand, where will my hand be? Very simple. So I'm starting with this angle. I'm sending voltage to the motor. What will be the next angle? So it's just internal models about the motors and the camera. And then what I did is I used the things it learned to actually learn second-order correlations. And the second-order correlation suddenly became really cool. So the robot actually discovered, it learned how to recognize itself. What does it mean, a robot recognizing itself? It means that if I give it this picture, it will give me 1 for the hand and 0 everywhere else. So it actually learned how to recognize itself. How did it learn this? So it learned that if I move my hand and something moves in the visual field, then that something is me. Okay? So it learned actually to put 1 when something moved and when I moved my hand. And this correlation actually gives you self-recognition. And so there was a big hype a few years ago, like a robot developing, learn to recognize itself, developing consciousness, and taking over the world. So that's what I call Facebook logic. It's stupid and it's nonsense. I can actually prove that any robot that can move its sensors it's a second-order correlation is self-recognition. Any robot that can move its sensors. So it's a mathematical, I mean, if you just learn things, it will learn to recognize itself. It has nothing to do with consciousness and nothing to do with anything else. So that's really cool, but it's more than that. As I told you, curiosity is not about learning, not only about learning, it's about behavior. So the question is, how should the robot move in order to learn this thing? So I'll give you 2 examples of how it should not move. If it moves randomly, it will learn this thing, but it's not optimal. And if it doesn't move at all, again, not optimal. So the optimal behavior to actually learn this thing is to actually move your hand and follow its gaze, like follow it with your eyes. And the robot actually learned that behavior. So it started with random behavior, like a random moving the eye and randomly moving the hand, and it slowly converged to following its own hand. And why is this super cool? Because there is a developmental stage in infants when they suddenly discover their own body and say, oh, that's me, that's so cool. And my robot was actually excited about looking at its own hand because it got reward whenever it looked at it. So this simple robot actually got the developmental stage of infants of discovering its own body. Yes, a question. Question? Any question?
Yes, I had a
Go on, Tejas, after.
So is the curiosity for a robot means the number of questions it asks in order to discover something? Is that how we measure the curiosity for a robot?
So in this robot, it doesn't ask questions, it explores the world. And the measure of curiosity here, from my perspective, is how much it learned. So if it did some behavior that did not give it any information, then it did not get reward. But I understand. I think I understand your. Yeah. Another question?
Yeah. So this is Akshay here. My question actually leads from Gayatri's. The first part I think you already answered, which is what is the measure of curiosity. But I also wanted to know, does that, I understand that you're using reinforcement learning to reinforce positive behavior. Yes. Is there a ceiling effect for this in curiosity, in learning curiosity? Because I mean, it may not be a good fit, but they say the curiosity kills the cat. So negative reinforcement. Yeah.
Okay.
So how do you?
Yeah. Okay. So there are actually two answers to your question. So the first answer is curiosity is not the only drive. So in my robots, I actually give them only curiosity, but for animals and people, there are other drives like safety and reproduction and hunger and stuff like that. So I mean, harm, you don't want to harm yourself. So in people, there are different drives that compete on how you behave. But in my robots, I put only the curiosity drive, so there's no limit here. The second answer to your question is at some point you learn everything you can with that simple behavior. So you can't learn anymore, but then you use what you learn in order to learn something new. So you're still curious, but you're suddenly shifting your goal of curiosity, what you're trying to learn. I suddenly discovered that it's like I talked for half an hour and I'm in like my third out of 30 slides. So I'm going to talk a little bit faster, if that's okay. Yeah, another question.
To the end, so that we can hear the whole talk. I was also kind of concerned that we may not get to hear the whole talk.
Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit faster, no questions, like for the next 15 minutes, and then we'll see. Okay, so this is a robot that learns about itself, and now I wanted to talk about robots that learn about the environment. So the question is, my question was, what do infants see when they're born? So a really cool experiment by Linda Smith, they put cameras on infants and they saw that, not surprisingly, infants see a lot of faces when they're born. So we picked our favorite face and we fed that to a curiosity loop. And we first showed that actually faces are the most informative thing. So if you put a video camera and you film what you're usually seeing in life, then you see that actually faces and people are actually the most informative channel in the environment. And as I told you, that information equal reward, and here faces equal information. So we actually did what we call the deep curiosity loop. I won't go into it, but it's very cool. And we actually showed that, again, using only video streams as passive information, this algorithm actually learned to recognize faces in an unsupervised manner. So usually you have face detector today, but it's used by labeled information. You get, this is the face, this is not a face, this is the face, this is not a face, this is how you learn. Here, this algorithm learned to detect faces by itself because it is the most informative channel. But as you can see, it also recognizes hands. And the question is, why is that? It's because we also move our hand when we talk. And when we talk, we also move my hand, and it's actually another information channel. So what we call it, it's not face detector, it's a social cue detector. And again, this is only because faces and hands are the information channels. And if a curious algorithm wants to learn about its environment, then the most information it will get is if it looks towards, and this is a map of where the algorithm looks at, if it looks towards the face and the hands, it will get the most information. So it actually changes the behavior. It focuses on faces and hands because this is the most information channel. And this is very cool, again, because we know that infants look at faces more than non-faces, which is very cool. And the next step is something even cooler. So this is a robot that I worked with in MIT, in the Media Lab. It's called a DragonBot, and it has a face, a smartphone for a face. And you can see it can make a lot of facial expressions, like happy and sad and stuff like that. And because faces are informative, we actually gave it reward the more people looked at it. So it got information, it got reward the more faces looked at it, and it changed its facial behaviors. So the question is, which of the faces, yes, happy, sad, thinking, yawning, which face will actually make people stay there longer and give it more, look at it more longer. So the not surprising answer is actually the sad face. So the sad face, they're crying. And the data show that the sad face, at 30 seconds on average, people just did not leave. Because I stood there and I said, oh my God, what did we do? Is it because of me? Now, the robot is a doorknob, right? It just randomly projects faces. It has no feelings. But people anthropomorphize it and says, oh my God, maybe it has feelings. And that's why it's sad. They stay there when it's made that sad face. They showed empathy toward the robots. But again, curiosity is not about learning, it's about behavior. So after only 2 hours of interacting with a lot of people coming and going, the sad face was shown more than all the other faces. And this is crazy because this robot learned to cry in order to get attention from people. Sound familiar to anybody? It's a very, very human-like behavior, right? Childlike behavior that the children cry in order to get attention. And this very, very, very simple robot, 20 lines of code, of reinforcement, and just, showing faces, actually reconstructed very human-like behavior. And the question is why? And my answer is because there was a human in the loop. It learned what makes people tick. If people gave it attention, it was happy, it will learn to be happy. But people are more emphatic toward a sad robot or a sad crying robot. So in psychology and education, it's called giving a positive reinforcement to a negative behavior. So I'm doing a lot of experiments on my children, obviously, because it's fun and I don't need a ethical review board. So I'm implementing all of this on my children. So usually when a parent sees 2 children playing together, he said, oh my God, finally I can get my cup of tea. When do you attend the children? When they're starting to fight. So again, parental attention is the biggest reward that children can get. And they learn that if they fight, they get attention. If they playing nicely, they don't. So what I'm doing in my house is that when they're playing nicely, in random times, I go there and great, I love you, you're amazing. And if they fight, if there's no blood, I'm not coming. Okay, don't take that advice literally. Next. So can robot learn about emotions? So that was a very crazy experiment I did when I was in MIT. It's another crazy robot. And this is starting to go to education. So this was an educational scenario where a robot and child play together on an educational tablet. So this was for learning Spanish as a second language for preschoolers. It's a very crazy study because it was a fully autonomous robot in the classroom for 2 months, crazy study. And children learn words, but we don't care. Because what we actually wanted to do, you see this phone, it's called the Aftex phone, and we actually videotaped their facial expressions and got a feedback to the robot in real time whether they were happy or not. And the reason we did that experiment is because with robots, even though you think that it's extremely cool robots, there is something called the novelty effect. And the novelty effect means that it's very cool for the first time, for the second time it's okay, and for the third time you don't care anymore. So the biggest problem with educational social robots is that people really like it, but after some time they're boring. And what we try to do here is the robot change its behavior to maximize the happiness of the child, okay, as measured by their facial expression during this educational thing. So it also learned, help the child learn something, but also try to make the child happier. And we actually showed, so have the children play with the what we call personalizing robot, affective personalization robot, and have the children play with not. And we actually showed that the children who played with the personalized robot actually became happier with time as opposed to the other children who were not. And again, so it's very cool that in real time you can get feedback from children and actually change the robot behavior in real time so that children will be happier. Again, a lot of implications for education system. So I'm slowly transitioning to education. And this is if you remember the child that played with a toy after 5 years, she graduated and went to MIT. And now she started to play with robots. And again, it's a robot and child playing together on an educational tablet. Here it was a tablet to learn how to read. But again, they learn how to read, but we don't care about that. What we actually hypothesized here, and the question was whether curiosity is contagious. Are you curious when you're new curious people? So there are studies that people are curious, adults are curious if they're new curious people. There are studies that show that children to curious parents are more curious, students to curious teachers are more curious, but no one did an experiment of children. So whether a child near curious children becomes more curious, but doing studies with children is horrible, so we threw out the child and put a robot instead. And now the research question became, if a child plays with a curious robot, does the child becomes more curious? And we did this study, and here what is the curious robot here? So the robot says here, I love to learn. No matter we made a mistake, we learned something. We I wonder what would happen if, and a lot of expressions of enthusiasm from learning. And then we measured the curiosity after the interaction, and we actually showed that the children who played with the curious robot were actually more curious about during the interaction than the children who played with the non-curious robot. And we had a lot of curiosity measurement, and I'm going to talk about it in a second. So again, it has a lot of implications for the educational system. It means that social robots can not only teach the curriculum, math and science and language, they can also promote metacognitive skills like curiosity. And it's very, very important because everybody knows that curiosity is the name of the game today, because information is out there in Google, but you need the drive to learn, and you need to promote children's desire to learn and enable them to learn. And it's very, very, very important. Another thing that's called growth mindset. I don't know if you know about it. Again, 20 seconds on growth mindset. Carol Dweck coined this term. There are two mindsets. Fixed mindset says that a person thinks that nothing can change. I'm stupid, I will always be stupid. Gifted children also have this problem because I'm so smart, I will always be smart, and I will always succeed no matter what I do. And that's why they are afraid of trying something new, because that will break their own schema of themselves. And the growth mindset says, no, if I learn, if I give an effort, then I can improve, and everybody can improve if they learn and if they learn and try hard. And there's now don't quote me, okay? There's something called bad parenting. Bad parenting saying that to a child that you're beautiful and smart, because that perpetuates the state. And good parenting says that you tried hard and you learn more, and that's great that you tried, because that actually congratulates the process. And a lot of studies, like 100 studies already showed that if you congratulate the process, you can actually promote growth mindset. And so we said, okay, if curiosity works, maybe growth mindset also works. So we did this study, again, with a robot and a child playing together on a tablet game, never mind. But actually, have the children play with a growth mindset robot that says, I'm trying hard. It doesn't matter that I fail. I tried more, and congratulate the child. Wow, you tried so much. That's so good. And the other one says, congratulate, says, wow, you succeeded. You failed. You succeeded. That's good. But didn't congratulate the process. And then we measured the growth mindset, both behaviorally and self-report. And we showed that the growth mindset robot actually promoted the growth mindset in children. Again, huge implementation and unification for the educational system, because suddenly it means that you can promote growth mindset and curiosity with social robots. It's very, 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 very cool. So coming back to curiosity, we actually did a study that combines the two parts of my talk. One of them about the algorithms of curiosity, and the other one about social robots and promoting things in the educational system. And we actually did what we call the cognitive expressive architecture. So the robot played this tangram game with a child, and the robot literally was curious. What do I mean? It actually chose actions based on maximum learnability. So it estimated how much it can learn from each of its actions and selected that action that actually will promote the most learning. So it was, by my definition, a curious robot, but it was also a social robot. Why is that? It's because it actually externalized its curiosity variable outside. So it was something that it was learnable. It says, wow, I'm choosing this action because I can learn more of it, or I'm choosing this action because I can learn more from it, and it's very challenging for me. So it actually externalized its internal variables outside to the child. So it was both curious with machine learning and artificial intelligence sense, and it was also a socially curious robot because it externalized and promoted curiosity in the child. And we actually used the same algorithm that determined the behavior of the robot to to simulate the curiosity of the child, to actually assess the curiosity of the child, the same algorithm for the robot and the child. And we actually showed that the curious robot actually promoted the curiosity of the child as assessed by the same algorithm, which is very, very cool. This is a publication in Revision. So that actually summarizes the curiosity part of my talk, which is the algorithm and the social curiosity. I want to briefly go over other projects that I have in the lab for the next probably 5 or 10 minutes, and then I'll open to questions about everything, okay? Is that okay? Sounds okay?
Yeah.
Excellent, thank you. Wait, I forgot. A lot of things about curiosity. So one of the biggest questions, and it's literally $1 million question, how do you assess curiosity? And it's a $1 million question because I got $1 million to actually try to answer it, because surprisingly, there is no curiosity assessment quantitative tool. The only tool to assess curiosity is actually ask a person, how curious are you? Rate 1 to 5. Where there are more complex questionnaires, but that's actually the baseline. And what I wanted is, based on my models, I wanted to assess people's curiosity. So what I did is that I put people in several weird scenarios where they had to learn something. For example, in this scenario, they had to learn how to control the robot with their hand. There was a Kinect sensor here. They could control the robot with their hand, but the transformation was weird. So if you move the right hand, the robot moved its left hand, and you had to learn it. And then we actually ran our own algorithm to see what is the optimal curiosity learning, curiosity behavior. And then we compared the participants' behavior to the optimal behavior, and we could actually get a distance metric for how near their optimality to the most curious person they can be. And we showed that it actually predicting the self-report and also other measures. In this crazy setup, we actually had 4 robots, and it measured social curiosity. So these robots were actually friends of one another, and they hated one another, and they did a non-verbal behavior. So a robot that was a friend to another robot actually leaned forward and opened its arms, and the robot that was not a friend of another looked away. And the participant wore an eye tracker, and it looked at the robot. And in the end, they had to say which robot likes most. And what we measured is which robot you're looking at to get the information. And again, we solved this problem with our computational model. We have a distance matrix between what was the optimal behavior and what was the behavior that people did, and it was correlated to curiosity. But the results we got was actually more interesting, because we measured their behavior towards during the entire interaction. We had a moment-by-moment quantitative measure of their information gathering behavior. And what we did is that the first session, during this robot, the people were actually not told what was the task. Robots were just moving around, and we need to look at them, and you don't know what you need to do. We hypothesized that curious people will look more, and non-curious people will not look more, but we were wrong. What we actually discovered, so this is the correlation between our information gathering behavior, the quantitative thing, and the self-report questionnaires. And what we discovered is that the behavior initially was actually more correlated to psychological inflexibility, to social anxiety, and how you react to a new situation, and not curiosity. Only after some time, when you repeated the task several times, that the curiosity actually comes about. And again, it has a lot of implications to education. If you go to a new class, and suddenly a child, asks a lot of questions, think, wow, that's a curious child. No. That's the child with the lowest psychological inflexibility. It's the child that actually has the lowest social anxiety, and not necessarily the child that is most curious. Only after children and people are becoming more relaxed and safe does the curiosity enable. This actually relates to one of the questions you asked about curiosity killed the cat. There are other drives like social anxiety and fear and stuff like that. And only when the other drives are low, then the curiosity drive can actually take control of your actions. So that is very, very cool. We also did for children a tablet game about question asking, and we could actually take quantitative measures of what is a good question, what is a bad question. And we actually ran a study with a youth of children aged 12 to 15. And we actually showed that using this game of 2 or 3 minutes game, we can actually predict their curiosity, how they were rated by their teachers. So teachers rated their curiosity, and we got a quantitative measure of which question they asked. and we can actually predict them very, very well. And what it means is that curious children don't ask more questions, they ask different questions, which is very cool. If you want, you can read it in the paper. Now we're trying to do these curiosity questionnaires in schools to have like a curiosity map in school. This is an ongoing study we're trying to do, to actually give a questionnaire for the parents and the teachers, and then do the curiosity games for the children and see what are the correlates of children's curiosity, what can predict children's curiosity. Is it the parent? Is it the teacher? Is it the social environment? Is it the classroom? A lot of really cool questions. Okay, last thing I'm going to talk about. Three last things I'm going to talk about. So this is the project I did with a social robot about robot facilitation of small group discussion. So the robot actually facilitated small group discussion in the classroom in the university. What do I mean by facilitating? It means that it gives, okay, everybody please answer your question on the tablet. You have 2 minutes, and after it's, okay, you didn't give the same answer. Please, debate and get to a consensus. And then it facilitates the discussion. And now we're moving actually, so this is my children. And now we're moving to schools, and we already started a pilot in schools of a robot facilitating small group discussion within schools. Which is very, very cool with the Ministry of Education in Israel, which is very, very cool. I'm not going to talk about. So again, I'm in Israel, so you have to open a startup if you're in Israel, otherwise you get deported. I know I'm saying this joke twice, but it's true. So we actually use this robot to actually teach toddlers English as a second language, and using this and actually leveraging the fact that the caregiver is there. So it's actually a triadic interaction between the robot, the child, and the toddler. Sorry, the robot, the toddler, and the parent. And we're leveraging all of them. It's very, very cool. And here's the kind of interaction. And we actually did an experiment, it was published, and we actually showed that we compared this to a tablet, the same interaction, but with a tablet. And we actually showed that if you're using a robot, there's a lot of more physical engagement and joint attention and mutual gaze using this. And it's very, very cool. And we open a startup on this, and that's it. And the special thanks to all the people who are collaborating and some people who decided to give me money for some reason. And I'll say thank you and open the board for questions. And I'll stop sharing the screen. So maybe I can actually see some people. Thank you. I'm done.
Maybe everybody can turn on their cameras so that Goren will have a chance to see us.
Yay. Hello. Wow, suddenly lots of people. Wow, I hope you were all there. I couldn't tell. Okay.
So Goren, you know what? I'm going to ask 2 quick questions.
Yes.
One is there any different, are there different kinds of curiosity?
Yeah. So,
and I have in mind 2 things. One is learning a language, a first language, which appears to be natural to us. Teaching, you and I have spoken about that. It seems to be natural to us. And then there's also written language, history. These are cultural products that took hundreds of thousands of years to get to it. And as an example, are those 2 different kinds of knowings, natural and less natural? Are there different kinds of curiosities? And I'll just ask one other quick one. There's an expression, curiosity killed the cat.
Yeah.
Okay. So is there such a thing as too much?
Yeah, so I'll answer the second question because I talked a little bit about it. So again, in biological beings, as opposed to robots, there are other drives. So if you're curious, it's okay, but usually you also don't want to die. It's another very important drive. So there is a limit of what you're trying to do. Actually, if you really want to go into it, there is something called safe reinforcement learning. Because in reinforcement learning algorithm, you actually have exploration and you can go to very dangerous places. And someone developed safe algorithms, and it's something to do with ergodicity. So you're going only to places that you know you can come back from. And this is something like a computational side. The first question is it's like an answer that takes a whole course, because curiosity is a very multifaceted way. I'm going to talk about like 3 things that come on top of my head. There's something called state curiosity and trait curiosity. Trait curiosity is like I'm a curious person. State curiosity is I'm curious now. All of my curiosity assessment things are about state curiosity, because I'm measuring the curiosity now and not whether you're curious in general. The other thing is you have specific curiosity and diverse curiosity. Diverse curiosity is that if you see someone reading something and laughs, all the people in the world will want to know what he's reading. And like it's a diverse, everybody wants to know about this, but not everybody wants to learn about cars or about history. So there are specific curiosity about specific domains. And this is part of the drawbacks of my studies, because if someone doesn't like, I don't know, robots, then it will like score very low on my curiosity scale because it just doesn't like robots, not because he's not curious. So all of my studies are about like state and specific curiosity. So it's very hard, but this is why I'm trying to do like a batch of like a toolbox of assessment of curiosity, because there are a lot of different things. The third thing I want to talk about is expression of curiosity. So there's social curiosity. So there's a chapter in Susan Engel's book called gossip. So gossip is a kind of curiosity because you're interested in other people. So this is social curiosity. There's physical curiosity. You're interested about your own body. There's tinkering. You like to like take apart things. So there's a lot of different expressions of curiosity. And cognitive curiosity, there are a lot of different kinds of expressions of curiosity. So curiosity is a very, very big thing. This is why I'm trying to do, I have already like, I think 5 or 6 curiosity assessment tools, because I want to like try to catch the whole thing. It's very hard. Okay. Yeah, I see people raising their hands. Yeah.
Can I add? I just had a clarification there. So you mentioned social curiosity, and but then you also mentioned diverse curiosity. So I was wondering, when you talk about curiosity, when people have it in a group, like when one person looks at something, everybody turns in that direction. Is that social curiosity, or is that diverse curiosity, or is it somewhere in between?
So social curiosity is defined as the drive to know about people. So the object of the curiosity is about people. You want to know how they're feeling, what they're thinking, why they're doing what they're at. So the object of curiosity is social curiosity. Diverse and specific is diverse. You know, I want to know about things about in general. And specific, I want to know about this topic. Okay, excellent. Yes, next question.
Is there anything like curiosity exhaustion?
Exhaustion, that it's too much for you.
I mean, it's like, because you said that if somebody is curious, there's a reward thing, but the reward is not necessarily happiness, but it's some kind of a temporary satisfaction of some kind. But if you keep on doing it, do you exhaust that thing?
So, actually, I congratulate you, because I gave this talk like 100 times and I never heard this question about curiosity exhaustion. Really cool. I'll tell you the flip side of it, and maybe that will answer your question. Someone once asked me, because the reward system is usually research with relation to addiction, because addiction is too much reward. I mean, the reward system is too active and you get addicted to something. And you get addicted to information. Like, you just want to know everything and it overrides every other drive. And after I was asked that question, I discovered that I'm addicted. So hello, I'm Goren and I'm addicted to information, because it overrides a lot of other drives. So I think you can get addicted to it, get exhausted from it. I'm unsure. I'm pretty sure that again, this is my opinion. I don't have any research on it, but I'm pretty sure that after you get information and get rewards, immediately after that you're like satisfied, but you want more. So you want to get more information. I mean, it's a good question. I don't have an answer to it. You get 2 points. 2 points.
I think the body gets exhausted eventually. Like if you don't eat and sleep and go on and on.
I know. Yeah,
so just fall off the chair from exhaustion.
Exhausted. Wait. Your question was about whether you get exhausted if you don't get that information. So I think you don't. We actually have a blog on this, whether people that don't get any information at all, they're always, will their curiosity die? Like whether at some point you just lose your curiosity. And we have a blog between me and Susan Engel, and we actually don't agree. She says that people, like adults, can lose totally their curiosity, and I think they don't. I think what happens to people is that other drives are so powerful that they override it. like, you know, the mortgage and your children, and you need to submit that paper. You don't have time to be curious. But I think that if you like get relaxed and all the other drives, that the thing that will come out most is curiosity. That's my opinion. I don't have a study on that.
Okay. No, so I think both questions were asked. Is there also, just following up on this, is there a relationship between curiosity and depression?
That's an actually amazing question. I have no idea. Someone once suggested to treat people of depression with curiosity. It's an amazing thing. I don't know anything about it. I'm sorry. It's a great question.
You're not satisfying my curiosity now.
I can tell an experience.
No, but so I want to answer that sentence. But I am a curious teacher, so I tell you it's an amazing question. Let's research it together.
I can just an anecdote about that. When I was in school, in high school, I was really depressed, and then I was not curious, and I was only then again because of the school system also. Like I was also depressed because none of my curiosity was satisfied because the teaching was so boring, the school was so boring. But then when I came out of it as an adult, then I was curious again. So the depression, when you cannot find joy about anything, then you're curious also.
Yeah, very good question. I don't know.
So I have a couple of more questions. One, the thing is I'm working on social robots in the classroom, trying to look at measuring stress and self-regulation in children when they interact with the social robot. So I was just wondering, is there a relationship between curiosity and stress, or curiosity and self-regulation? Because you did mention memory and learning.
Yeah, so again, I have the same answer for the depression. I'm sorry. I don't know. Obviously, all of them are related. It's somehow. I don't know how. I will advise to stimulate the curiosity because that will somehow probably make them less stressful and stuff like that. So, but again, this is not my area. I don't know. Sorry.
And the second part of my question was, so you mentioned how you're putting a robot with a child to increase the curiosity of the child by putting a curious robot there. So usually what we see in the classrooms is the opposite, right? Children usually come in with a lot of curiosity. They're naturally curious. And over a period of time, because of the education system, they lose their curiosity because they're told to shut up or whatever. So have you looked at the other side of it? Like what leads to the negative reinforcement?
So I'll tell you several things. First of them, everybody that was in school know what you just said, that curiosity, school kills curiosity. I looked for the paper that studied that, and there aren't. There are like 1 or 2 papers, and the only papers that actually report on this, their measure of curiosity was that someone sat in classroom and counted how many questions they asked. And that's not good enough for me because there are no model-based quantitative measure of curiosity, then I just actually don't believe that statement until I see it like studied. That's what I'm trying to do actually. And in initial studies that we have, is actually a disentangling between in the intrinsic drive to learn, the curiosity, and the activity, the participation in classroom. And what we see that the participation in classroom decreases, but the curiosity does not. So again, very preliminary results, like only 50 children and stuff like that. But I think it's very telling because I don't think that children are not curious; they just don't care, and no one lets them be curious. So they're not expressing it, but I don't think their intrinsic drive is harmed. They just they're not let to be this. So I'm not studying how to depress curiosity because that's not ethical. Creating a robot that destroys your curiosity. We actually got from a reviewer of one of our papers that's saying that it's not okay to actually be neutral. So it's not ethical to try to destroy curiosity. But I think it's very easy to destroy curiosity. You simply don't enable exploration. If the person you're with do not role model curiosity and does not enable you to ask questions or do not give you information, that's enough. You don't need anything else. And this is the educational system.
Goren, I would like to ask some of the students to ask questions as well.
Of course.
Hi, Hi, I have a question about, you mentioned that embodiment is important in this process. Like the robot has to have a body so that it can have this experience of learning about itself, even in a non-social environment when it's alone. What would this curiosity algorithm do if it doesn't have a body?
So it's a good question. So the curiosity is defined as the drive to learn. So the question is, what can it learn? What is the input? You can give for example, in the example of the faces that I showed with the Big Bang Theory and stuff like that, it was just an algorithm. It has no body. So the question is, what is the input? What can it learn? So if you have an algorithm that is fed with a simulation or with videos, or has some possibility to act upon the world and get, or not about the world, about simulated world, I don't care, about to act and get information, that's the only requirement to have to be curious. You don't need to have a body, you need to be able to act. And so I'll give another example, which I didn't talk about. We actually developed curiosity algorithm for data science, where the information is the database, and the actions is you query the database and you're trying to learn something from it. So we use the exact same algorithm to do what we call curious feature selection. We have a published paper on this. So it's exactly the same algorithm as the robot, but on data. So you don't need embodiment, you just need to be able to act and get information.
Okay, so I had a bit of a follow-up to that. And this goes out into the realm of metaphysics, but in sort of non-dualist philosophies or religions, the idea is that consciousness precedes existence and creates existence, and that everything that exists could be a construct, if you will, of an infinitely powerful consciousness. And I guess when I was looking at this, one of the questions that comes up is like, why would consciousness create manifest reality, right? But if consciousness is inherently curious, then wouldn't it want to have the most complex forms of embodiment, as well as the greatest potential to act not only alone, but in social environments? I know that's kind of outside of science, but I find it fascinating.
No, I love it. So there is a saying, I have no idea who said it, and it's very cool, but there is a saying that says, against boredom, even the gods themselves are helpless. And it's exactly what you just said, is that an infinitely powerful thing, the most dangerous thing for it is curiosity, is boredom, is that not being able to learn something new, or not being to manipulate the world and see what happens. Because if it's all powerful, then it's extremely boring. So I think, yeah.
If I just quickly add to that comment, in Indian philosophy, they say that creation happens with God's need to want to know itself. I won't say himself because I don't think God is gendered, but to know oneself, and that's it's very much in line with what she said.
Yeah, exactly. I would love to, wow. I don't know you people, but if you want to collaborate on this kind of thing, to write a paper on how creation is emergent from curiosity, I would love it.
Yeah, I would absolutely love that too. I find it really fascinating, and I don't want to occupy too much time, but I have one more question. One of the robots had a more humanoid form, and it had a more complex sort of artificial intelligence. And then the other robot, if I understand, was simpler and was based on this, just curiosity, and then it would kind of level up as it learned. Which robot is more congruent or similar to how human babies learn, and what does that imply about the sort of debate between nature versus nurture? Are we tabula rasa, et cetera, et cetera?
Wow, excellent question. So excellent question. So the reason I used a very simple robot is because I wanted to publish a paper, and you have to start, and I'm a scientist, and you have to control for everything. I actually wanted to do a very, very, very complex study. So an infant is an extremely complex stuff, but what you have is it's learning lots of stuff in parallel, which is something very cool. So I have this joke I usually tell in this talk, but I didn't have time. So if I tell you, wow, I'm giving you a robot, and after 5 years it can talk and tell jokes, and it's amazing, but only after 5 years. You won't buy it. It's a horrible robot. And I gave you a robot, and after 5 years, you can play soccer with it, and it's amazing. Again, it's who buys a robot that after 5 years will only work? But these are babies. I mean, right? Initially, they don't do anything, but in the end, they do everything. So, but they learn everything in parallel. And actually, if you think about it, extremely slowly. I mean, again, if you take now a machine learning algorithm, and you cannot publish a paper that says this algorithm ran for a year before it uttered its first word, that paper will never get published because it's a horrible algorithm. But this is the human brain, which is the most complex thing that you have. But the reason that it's so slow, I think, is because it learns everything in parallel. It learns how to discern language and faces and control its body and everything. And it's gradual and it's hierarchical and it's very, very complex. And I know it's weird, but it's actually very slow compared to today's machine learning algorithms. So it's an excellent question. Is one of my studies in the future will be to actually take this very complex robot and trying to do tabula rasa on it, like start learning, see what happens. Excellent question. Yes.
Hello, thank you so much, Dr. Goren. I wanted to ask whether have you ever come across any relationship between higher levels of curiosity with, let's say, better retention or better memory?
Yeah, so I didn't, but as I said, there are studies that are actually based on neuroscience that shows that if you're in a curious state, you learn more, which means that if you are curious, you actually learn and retention memory more. So yes, it actually from an educational and psychological perspective, if you want children to learn, it's obvious, but now it's backed by neuroscience that you need to make them curious now. So they return more of what you learned.
Right, thank you.
Yes.
So I wanted to ask a question as to on what basis are these robots programmed? Like I assume they are programmed by humans. So like on what basis are they programmed? Like meaning do we for example
No, it's okay. I understand. It's a very good question because people say, okay, if people are programming robots, then the robots are not curious because we program them to be. So there are two things very important about my algorithms and curiosity algorithms in general. Two things. Something very unique to my algorithm is I didn't program the robot what to learn. It actually learned everything. So I didn't know, a priori, when I programmed the robot and pressed run, I did not know what it will learn because it totally depends on the environment it's in. The second thing is that the reinforcement learning algorithm, although I programmed the algorithm, I did not know what will be the emergent behavior. So how the robot behaves, I don't know it, even though I programmed it, because there are a lot of things that are learned via random processes and via interaction with the environment. So even though I programmed everything, I can tell you like at least 2 or 3 behaviors and things that the robot learned really surprised me. I, in hindsight, could think about it, but when I programmed it, I didn't think about it. So all these curiosity learning based algorithms are actually, I think I sent you the paper, are like emergent properties. You program curiosity, but actually a lot of behavior are emergent that you cannot a priori say that you know what they are.
Okay, so just like a follow-up question as to, do you think that the findings of your study would be the same with another robot, meaning?
No, so again, very, very good question. So the algorithm is general. What the robot learns depends on its body and its environment. If the robot doesn't have a camera, it has a microphone instead, it will learn totally different things. If it has 2 arms instead of 1, it will learn new things. If the robot can move with wheels, it will learn new things. The algorithm will be the same. It will always learn what it can, but the behavior, the emergent curiosity behaviors will be different. It depends on the embodiment of the robot.
Okay, thank you so much, sir.
Maybe like two last questions.
I had a question, Mr. Gordon.
Yes.
I wanted to know whether you have also thought about relation of curiosity with analytical thinking, and also when we are saying curiosity helps in bringing up memory, it enhances the memory. Are we also studying here different types of memory, like visual memory or audio memory, or all these related, or what are your opinion on that?
So I answered the second question first. I think it's all memory because it depends on the hippocampus and not on specific cortical areas like the vision or audio and stuff like that. So I don't know. But I think it's general and not sensor specific. The first question, analytical thinking, again, from my perspective, the analytical thinking comes into the learner. So if you learn something analytical and you're curious about it, then that's good for me. I don't think curiosity is analytical. I think it's an intrinsic drive, like you want to learn. You cannot be analytical about the curiosity itself. I mean, you're trying new stuff, and I don't know. It's a good question. I don't know. I didn't think about it thoroughly. It's a good question.
Mr. Gordon, I was asking to know this because when we are learning in the process, the initial drive comes from curiosity, but to really master something, we need to go through the process of ups and downs and that thing. Yeah. So,
okay, So I want to say something about this. So it's weird. There is a different field of study that is called interest, like interesting interest. It's overlapping curiosity, but it's actually different. And what you are talking about is interest. So interest starts from curiosity, but later on turns into something more long-term, where you actually study something. You're not just curious about, you're interested in it. Again, it sounds the same, but it's actually not. And people who study curiosity don't know interest, and those who didn't study interest don't know curiosity. They're overlapping, but it's actually different. And if you look, there's a book about interest, and this is more about what you're now saying, like the long-term engagement with a topic. It's called interest.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah, maybe last question, because I also have to go in 10 minutes. Yeah. Okay.
Sure. Do you want to ask something?
Sorry, this is a fun question. Sorry, no camera. So I don't know anything about robots. Even after reading the paper and listening to this discussion, I still have a lot of questions about how the whole thing works. But I do love Star Trek, and I do remember that episode when Data was there was an emotion chip put in him. So just as a fun question, how far away are we from all that?
It's a very, okay. I'll tell you my opinion on emotions, putting emotions in robots. The problem is the definition. If you give me a non-circular definition of emotion, then probably I can formulate it into a model and put it in equations and then put it in a robot, like I did in curiosity. The reason we can do curiosity is because we actually understand it relatively okay, and we have a formal definition, and we have relatively know the brain structures around it, so we can do it. Emotions like love, hate, anger, stuff like that, they're much, I think, less well defined. And there are a lot of cognitive architectures and algorithms about anger and stuff like that, but I'm not sure that people will agree about them. And again, there's something about acceptance. So from my perspective, if I define curiosity as I defined it, and then I program it into a robot, then by definition, this robot is curious. So if you give me a definition of love, I actually have a definition of love, but I don't have tenure yet. So after I get tenure, I'll do a work on love. So if you have a definition of love, and it's non-circular and it's straightforward, and you can program it and you put it into a robot, then by definition, it's more, it doesn't have the quality of love or the love that we think about it as love, but by definition, literally by definition, because this definition we put into a robot, then it can love. So it's more about the tautology and how you define things, and less about programming and how far are we.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So Goren, you've been very, very kind. We've extended beyond the time that we had planned, and that's a good sign. Everybody really, I know, enjoyed themselves immensely. So I want to thank you for a really inspiring talk. The fact that there were so many questions is a sign that people enjoyed themselves and were thinking about what it is they have to say, had questions that went sometimes clarification, sometimes going beyond what it was that you said. terrific. And for the students, I'll just
Curious.
mention something. Yeah,
Everybody
I'll
was-
mention something, and that is that there were a number of times that Goren said, "I don't know." So keep that in mind, right?
It's the best part, right? As a scientist, that's the best part.
Exactly. That's where all the fun is.
Exactly.
For sure. Yeah. So Goren, you're great. It was really a first-rate talk. I told everybody that it was going to be, and I didn't keep my fingers crossed because I knew that it was going to be. So thank you really for taking time.
Thank you for the questions. Thank you for the questions. They're very inspiring also.
Okay, and Bhavani wants to say a few words. As I mentioned in the beginning, she's the head of AMMACHI Labs and also the Center for Women Empowerment and Gender Equality.
Wanted to thank you so much for such a wonderful talk, and I'm sure Sid will put us in touch, and then we can explain to you a little bit of what we do over here, and what your talk had implications on so many different aspects on what we're working, not just the robotics part of it, but just even things that we're doing in terms of women's empowerment. I mean, it's just so far reaching. So I wanted to really thank you for giving us so many ideas and so many more questions that I haven't asked us yet. And I already got 2 I don't knows from you. So I hope I get more, but I hope also that there are things that we can actually discover together. And I just wanted to make one last comment. The logo on one of your projects, the NICHD, it's very similar to a lot of the logos that we have over here, because we have a central theme, including the AMMACHI Labs logo. It's a person holding something, and I think it's the same kind of you have 3 people holding on to something. It's like a tree. So it's very similar to the thing. So I felt that was another area of connection. It's interesting how we look at that same symbol. It's the same symbol that's there in the Wireless Sensor Group, the original Embracing the World. Our institutional logo was very, very similar. Is a mother holding a child, but the same thing with a circle and a crescent and just like overlapping imagery. So so I wanted to say that I was very happy to see that. It shows connections at other levels also. So it's very nice. Thank you so much for your talk and your time. And maybe someday we all get to see each other and then we work on things together.
Yeah, sure. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, Goren. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sid, for bringing such wonderful speakers. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you. Bye.